Thank you for inviting me here. And now I don't know exactly what you said, but I know roughly because we prepared a bit together. And yeah, of what my main interests are. And I am an anthropologist, and I have a position at the Swedish University, and I have this year started a new research project on how it is to be Tamil in the diaspora or exile situation. I don't know which concept you prefer. And so I work in the overlap between art and anthropology, and that means both in terms of the subject I study and also in terms of methods and presentations I use. And this is also related to that I have a background as a photographer and artist. So I've been working as a practitioner before I sort of started my academic studies as an anthropologist. So that's sort of my take on the work I do now. And I see as where we are sort of in the world today in terms of increase of migration and increase of communication, which is fast through web and so on. And so there is an increase of people coming together from different parts of the world in certain places, which increase the communication between different groups of people and more interaction. And at the same time, there is also increase of closure to some extent in this situation, that there is an increase of conflict sometimes. And so it's a kind of in-between position, having a different homeland and then moving to a new place. And I'm trying to understand how it is for you to be in this in-between position. And I do this by looking at visual arts mainly. So that is my point of entry into this. But as an anthropologist, context is considered important. So it's not just artworks and artists, but for me to try and understand wider issues of what political, religious, social structures and all these things have to be part of also my writing and presentations of my research. I analyze also connections between art and politics, and whether politics is expressed in artworks and so forth. So I don't know if you want to translate in between, or how is the best way to do it.
I don't think we.
I think you will understand. We will understand.
Yeah, okay.
If we have difficulties, we will ask.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, just shout out if there's something.
I mean, people will understand. It's just
yeah. So I can also say that as my PhD research I did in Tamil Nadu.
I just have one question. If you use a theoretical term, use it and then also paraphrase it. So in case the English is a bit difficult, people will understand. I think generally everyone will understand, unless you use an academically, like a theoretical term. That you can paraphrase it a bit. That's the only way. That's the only difficulty, I think. Otherwise, we will all understand.
But I can ask you directly as well. Do you feel comfortable with the concept of diaspora as a term of the situation you're in, or is it? You more would say that you are in exile, or to term your position here, or I mean there are different ways of talking about that. I don't know whether you have an opinion on that.
Both.
It's
both.
It's both, but
you use both.
No, we won't be able to. We are so interested in the topic.
Yeah, because for me, it's also about finding good concepts to describe,
Diaspora, the phrase connotes both voluntary expatriation and forced. So I, for one, I would not deem myself to be a member of the diaspora. Or even you use the term exile. There are voluntary exiles as well as involuntary. So there is a problem when everyone is termed member of the diaspora, which will include people who deliberately escaped, as well as people who were displaced during conflict and who came over here, and also people who to be arrested and or detained out of fear they come over. So I think there is a problematic.
Yeah, I mean, when I write as an academic, the terms I use, the concepts I pay lots of attention to, I also define in my writing, because there are lots of different theoreticians that put various values and various definitions into these concepts. And I mean, I'm also using the concept artistic practices rather than art for what I am looking at. Yeah. And that's also deliberately chosen to widen the practices I'm looking at. So to not associate necessarily to the fine art elite scene, but to open up for various kinds of artistic expressions. And I started also this research, and still you could say that I don't define what are the Tamil artistic practices. I'm rather sort of asking the people I interact with, like you, what are these practices? What do you define as artistic practices? And well, I can also say that the research I did in Tamil Nadu a few years ago was about the colon practice, which also comes under this category of artistic practices, even though you wouldn't necessarily define it as an art form, as a fine art form, but it's a form of visual expression and artistic practice. And I also pay a lot of attention to the process of making things. And so, yes, I'm trying to understand your situation here. And so, yeah, then initially, because I have this background of interest in visual arts, and I thought from the beginning that to look at Tamil literature, and especially Tamil poetry, could not be part of what I was looking at, because I don't have a grasp of the Tamil language, and I felt I can't sort of access this directly. But then also interacting with people who are engaged in visual practices, they sort of brought that on for me, that they do visual works that are inspired by poetry, or people do drama inspired by poetry, and people make an image when they read poetry, and so there is a lot of interactions between these forms. And yeah, of course you can also say that poetry is an artistic practice or an art form. And then yeah, I was sort of also brought to Sheeran's article about the Tinai concepts as a partly base for this poetry. And so then his way of talking about the sixth genre of these sort of landscape or cultural signs or moods, that he talks about it as a basic for Tamilness, to understand Tamilness in this in-between diaspora or hybrid, you could say, situation that you're in. And so then I'm interested in whether you see this as a relevant concept to define your situation, and do you feel that these 5 initial historical poetry landscapes from the Sangam literature, if they, I mean, apart from the 6th one, these 5 ones, do they have any bearing in your life? Do they mean anything for you? Do you work with them? Do you write about them? Or do you have a kind of relationship with these?
Do you want us to answer now?
Shall
Yeah,
we
please.
address that?
I know about this Sheeran's, this construction, this theoretical construction. I've heard about it. And I think it's theoretically, it's very, very problematic. It's very problematic. It's really bad theorizing, I think, one, because it's to transfer this Thunai concept, which is from Sangam literature, to modern. We are in a modern. We've been through colonial modernity and post-modernity, and we are in this diaspora situation. It's, I think, anachronistic. It's ahistoric. It's theoretically so problematic to have this cultural thing to carve it out and superimpose it on some modern phenomenon. It just doesn't stand up to scrutiny. I mean, I know people have I know of other academics who have torn that theory apart. But in the Tamil diaspora circles, nobody questions it because it arises from a desperate desire, need to hold on to a kind of Tamilness in the diaspora situation. Because we still want to hold on to what is happening back home. So there is all this kind of really pseudo social scientific theorizing that is going on. This Peter Shaw, Chair, and they're all examples of this. It's really pseudo social science. I'm really sorry. And they do not, and you know, what is this Thunai? I mean, the Kurds are doing the same thing. The English, the Americans, the South Asian diaspora are doing the same thing. You know, there's a South Asian diaspora. Forget about the Tamil diaspora. There is a South Asian diaspora in the West. And there is an identity for us as part of this being the South Asian diaspora. If you go to Canada, they have a celebration called Desh Pardesh. And everybody gets involved, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis. So there's a South Asian identity, a consciousness of a South Asian diaspora and all kinds of cultures. And you know, if you go to New York, you have that. So what about them? We all communicate on the web. We do everything on the web now. So what about this Thunai? So something very specific to Tamil Sangam literature. Yeah. So you see, there are so many theoretical problems with this. My strong advice to you is to don't bark up Cheran's theoretical tree. It's you will be in academic trouble.
Do you want to respond, or do you want to?
You see, I am not an academic. I want to qualify my statement with that. I am not an academic, but I do go to academic conferences. Because I am a kind of an expert on Sri Lanka through my personal experience and reading and continuous involvement. So I am very often invited to a totally academic conference, and I find that, you know, my humble advice to you is that you are a European social scientist. You have to read the full spectrum of academic opinion on Sri Lanka by Tamils, Muslims, and Sinhalese. And you have to place all these people in there and give them the relative weight theoretically. And see where this, and this we can talk later on about this Tamilness, you know, we can talk about it properly afterwards.
But as I understand you mean that to use this is also to putting a barrier between other South Asians and Tamils, which doesn't necessarily have to be there. Or?
No, it's not a barrier at all. The problem is, it is unsound, I think. And that's, you know, the Sangam literature, that Thunai concept belongs to that period. And it describes a certain, you know, I mean, we don't know exactly historically the poets who carved up that concept, how they did it and why they did it. Of course, Tamils, like any other society, they lived in the mountains, they lived near the seaside, in the forest. So different kinds of poetry and literature emanated from these different landscapes. That's fine. That's not nothing, you know, you find that anywhere. You know, if you look at old English literature or probably old Swedish literature, somebody who sang a song from the forest or somebody who was a fisherman, his songs were different from, you know, it's basically that. But then to superimpose, to take that, borrow that and just artificially fix it to some completely modern, don't you think it's a seriously problematic, theoretically problematic thing? That's
thanks.
Any other? Can I just throw in?
That's all. I'm not going to talk.
Another version of that. Can we leave out the concept of Thunai and think about how people, their cultures, their identities are created by the environment they live in? It could be land, it could be village, whatever. are you interested in that?
Yeah, I'm interested in that, but maybe before.
So just further question.
Yeah.
If you're interested in that, then the question is, as Tamils, Tamil-speaking people, what you make sense of being in England, and how things are created as Tamil people, Tamil-speaking people in England.
Yeah, we could.
Are you making something new, or are we perpetuating something of the past?
I just want to see, you should ask others also to respond.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking also,
It is
that
for everybody.
if somebody first have something to say in relation to the Tinai before we sort of move it to
That's
a
right, because
different
others
level
read
would
Sarah
be-
as
well.
Yeah,
Others
because it's
also-
nice to hear other opinions as well.
You know, to be honest, Tinai, if you ask ordinary Tamil people, I don't think they have any kind of idea about Tinai.
Yeah.
Most, I think, unless if you read some poetry or whatever, then even I had to think what Tinai, and suddenly then I realized, oh, okay, this 5.
Tinai is from Bangalore.
So, I don't, it's a kind of, you just, in a certain academic way or political way, you connect the past to the future, present, in order to give an identity, or kind of, even Tinai, if you say, to 5 different territories and people lived there, like mountains and all those things, then it is a distinct cultures. They are distinct cultures as well in a cultural terms. They are not similar cultures. So you cannot have a single Tamil culture. You can't have multiple cultures and you can't then say that this is Tamil culture. It's problematic because those people who lived in that particular area, I don't think they have a kind of identity as Tamil at the time. They identified themselves as that people who lived in the mountains or fishermen and fisher folks, or especially the caste, the caste identities. This is another way of, or politicizing or poetical way of saying that it's another Tinai is coming here. I don't think anyone will.
Okay.
Yeah, so would you say in general then that there is too much of a gap between contemporary situation and this historical kind of that?
No,
Can I?
no, that's a fact. I think the historical way of looking at things and modern way of looking at things, it's becoming a much different, because now the race relationship itself is breaking. Because now those days, now Tamils who are living in a particular area of land, but now when you look at it, Tamils mean Tamils are living in all over the world now, and their concepts are not the same as even back at home. Things are changing. Because we cannot look back the history and say, okay, we are Tamils because we have to do our cultural things. Culture, it depends on the land where they are living. As you all said, the Mullai, all this. It depends on the area of that. So we are living in a different area and different atmosphere. So definitely our concept about culture, religion, politics, all that is changing, and it keep on changing. So I don't think that it's possible to bring back a historical concept into the modern environment and try to say, oh, this is this.
Yeah.
That's.
I'm thinking about something else also. If we think about that historical period, that maybe it was also that people actually did move around then as well. But it's sort of, I mean, it's a way of categorizing, and categorizing is always simplifying in a way, isn't it?
We are talking about a period of 2,000 years.
Yeah.
Look at the history of your country. What were your people doing 2,000 years ago? There's absolutely no, I mean, you know, like when you look at Western civilization, to say that Greek civilization was was the fount of Western civilization is an anachronistic statement. Because the Greeks who built up the Greek civilization were not the Greeks that we know now. They were Mycenaeans, they were Egyptians, they were somebody else. They looked different. They were different people. Do you see what I mean? That's why in Western scholarship we say, all these English, British nationalists, European nationalists, they write this long history, this wonderful long history about how European civilization started in Greece. Bullshit. We know that it's bullshit. Without the Muslims, there is no Western civilization. Because without the Arabic philosophers, Europe wouldn't have known about Aristotle or Plato or anybody. Because they were the ones, they were the inheritors of that. And then it came back. That was the root. So this history, the Tamils, there is an academic discourse, there's an academic debate about whether the people who wrote Tolkappiyam or who wrote Sangam literature were actually Tamils. Whether it was even called the Tamil language. Granted, Tamil is one of the languages of antiquity. It's recognized as a language of antiquity by the United Nations and all of that, and it's still thriving and all of that. But whether that there's so much discontinuity in history. In fact, discontinuity in history is more the rule than the exception.
So does anybody...
And different social... I think, even to start with, the proposition is wrong.
So why do you think he wrote it in this way? Does anybody have an idea about why is he using this old historical concepts in order to make sense of today?
I'm not an expert in economic terms or on other terms. I just want to comment. There is a political purpose for why people conceive ideas and form into concepts. Sharon lives in Canada. How does he and other people relate to me? I'm another Tamil living in London. And more importantly, how do they relate to the Tamils of Sri Lanka, over whom neither me nor Sharon has any control of what they are doing or what they are thinking. But the concept of getting all of us together in the name of Tamilness is a political concept.
Project.
Aim is a political. Particularly the defeat of Tamil nationalism in the local context in Sri Lanka has given rise to these expatriate academics, particularly who followed a particular political line. To take it further, they have to develop a concept. Transnational Tamil nationalism. Charan he gave birth to this concept, and it is being practiced by Rudrakumar in the United States by forming what they call transnational government of Tamil. It is also like the concept, this so-called transnationalism also is just floating in the air. There is nothing, there are ministers, prime ministers, health ministers, sports ministers. What they do among the Tamils of the world, how they link, is absolute buggeroo.
But, if we look at the concept Tamil then, unrelated to Charan's theories of Tinai and so on, Tamil as Tamil, what is that? Is that something, or is it also just too large of a label? Are we all individuals that are totally
if you ask that
different?
question, you will have to ask every community, say Irish. What is Irish?
Oh yeah, of course. I know, but I can't sort of do my research on everybody in the whole world. I have to frame.
You have a purpose also.
Yeah. I also have a purpose, and my way of describing, when I present my research, it's also important for me what do these labels mean for you? When I'm working with the artists here as well, I'm always asking them also about this label. can I, do you feel that this fits, or would you rather be, have another label as whatever, Asian, or... So I mean, is there something that is more Tamil? I mean, there are loads and loads of Tamil community centres all over the world these days. So what does that stand for? Is there something that it represents, or is it just a word? Or do you feel that there is something that holds Tamils together?
Well, as you said, it's a politicalized concept, the Tamilness. Because we imagine certain things, or we are together, we have one objective, one goal, one leader. It goes on like that. So it's not practically, it's not like that. The oneness or Tamilness is not there. But if you find it in Tamil Nadu, you can say, yes, there is something. But when you come out from Tamil Nadu, the Tamilness, it depends on the region where it's spoken. Even back in Sri Lanka, there is no one Tamilness.
Yeah.
When we say Jaffna, Eastern Province, up-countries, Muslims, who equally speak the same Tamil and develop that language, so it varies.
Yeah.
But in Tamil Nadu, there is a Tamilness. Now when you say, even a Muslim identify himself in Tamil Nadu as a Tamilian, or whatever you call it. But when it's outside the borders of Tamil Nadu, it's not like that.
Yeah.
That's what we are trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah, so I fully agree that one label cannot sort of incorporate all aspects of all these individuals, but I'm trying to think whether is there something that holds you together. I mean, I do know that there is a Tamil language that you speak. I mean, that could be seen as something that is something that you share. And if you look at everyday life, not just only on the political official scene, but everyday life, whether it's appropriate to use Tamil in some ways. I mean, I would never say that all Tamils are the same. I mean, that of course doesn't make sense. But also that one can talk about being in the diaspora situation as an aspect of Tamilness, and is there something of that aspect that you share? And I have parts of my theoretical interest comes from phenomenology, and in that particular field, people are also talking about the relationship between human beings and the landscape in the here and now, so to speak, not as a historical. And so for me also reading about the Tinai concept and this new version of it was relating partly to that. And so then if we think like that growing up, you establish a relationship with the landscape and makes that as a part of your identity, whether you live in an urban space or in a village or by the sea or wherever it is. And so I'm thinking, do you feel that that is something that is important for you in your lives, and do you think it's possible to establish a new relationship with a different landscape, as in the case of moving to a new nation state or being displaced? Or do you feel that you have a kind of that the landscape or the place you're from is part of your identity, and do you think that it's possible to shift this closeness to a new place, or is it just that you will always carry this closeness to where you grew up?
I think it has kind of multiple layers about your Tamil identity, and also especially those who came recent, the first generation Tamils who came from Sri Lanka. They have a kind of sense of belonging to Sri Lanka as well. But for that's not necessarily they want to have their Tamil identity as such. There are several other reasons to fit into this society, the kind of European-wide society. It's a difficult thing. One is the language, the other one is the racism, employment, all this. So that is one of the reasons. I'm not saying that is the only reason. The second reason is the political issues, which most of them came because of the political issue. So they have that sense of, awareness, not only awareness, they think that the other people were fighting or other people were dying. It's a guilt